Last time on the Skip and Josh podcast.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be a long time, but just a good intro.
I think we're on the same page. I've had this topic in the back of my mind for like 2 years.
Right, yes. Just like we had this idea of doing a podcast in the back of our minds for 7 years before we actually started doing it.
You're listening to the Skip and Josh podcast with Skip Sherman and Josh Obadia.
Okay, Skip, so today we're going to talk about professional athletes, players in the wrong uniform, and we'll explain what that means in a minute. And I think this topic was sent in by Derek in Montreal. So thank you, Derek, for suggesting it. But before we get to that, I want to ask you if you have watched this new Netflix show called The Watcher.
I saw the trailer. We considered watching it, but just haven't done it yet. Is it good? Is it good?
So, yes, it's good. I've watched the whole thing. I'm not going to tell you anything about it.
Okay, I'm going to watch it then.
But I have to tell you that I did some research after watching the show.
Right.
And I'm not going to spoil anything for you, but it's based on a true story. I don't know if you're aware of this.
What?
The show is not just a show. It's based on a true story. So don't do any research because it's going to ruin the show for you. Do the research after you've watched it. I was hoping you'd already watched it so I could talk all about it, but it's based on a true story. So it's even creepier than you think.
The trailer I saw, it's like they show you some really weird interaction between like neighbors where she's like, well, I'm on this side of the property, I'm on that side of the property, or the plants or the garden. And it should be like nothing, but it's actually kind of very creepy. So yeah, I'm going to watch it.
Speaking of watching television, do you watch regular television anymore? Like if there's a show that you want to watch, do you watch the show live with commercials and everything?
Very rarely. Well, I mean, I watch some regular, what you would call regular network TV shows, yes. You know which ones, I think you know which ones they are. It's all the Chicago Med, Chicago Fire, Chicago PD. I'm kind of an addict on those.
Right, but you record them and watch them later, right?
I record them. I have the option of watching them later, but normally, like on Wednesday when those shows are on, like I'm usually just watching them live. To be honest, like I'm watching them
with
live.
commercials.
Yeah, well, I mean, we try to sometimes. It's just the way it works out, you know. Sometimes I watch it without commercials, I skip them. Sometimes if I'm watching it live, I watch it with. I mean, the other show that I watch regularly, but not live, but recorded every day is Jeopardy, as you know. But that's pretty much it. My wife watches like Bachelor in Paradise and The Bachelor, those shows, like, but also recorded, you know. So, but yeah, it's almost never that I watch a show like live, really, almost never, other than sports. And actually, even that, I mean, you know.
So I'm surprised that you watch all the commercials. And the reason I bring it up is, you know how I used to be I still am a big fan of David Letterman. And since he retired from his late night talk show, I don't watch any of those late night talk shows anymore. None of them.
Yeah.
But the other day, I was looking through the guide and I noticed that David Letterman was actually one of the guests on the Jimmy Kimmel show. And so I thought, I'm going to watch this. It might be interesting, right? I don't know. I haven't heard from Letterman in a long time. He hasn't called or texted me. So I'd like to watch this episode, but it was already midnight when I had discovered this. The show starts at 11:30. And so I figured I probably missed Letterman because he's probably the first guest. Mm-hmm. So I go to that channel, I change the channel to that channel and there's a commercial. So I figure, okay, whatever. I'll wait till the commercials are done and I'll see if I missed Letterman or not. If not, I can rewind or there's always a way to find an old episode or something. Anyway.
Yeah.
I want you to guess how many minutes of commercials I had to sit through before the program actually resumed. What would be a normal amount of minutes to sit through commercials?
Like 8 30-second commercials?
So that's 4 minutes.
Something like that, yeah.
Right. That is normal. I would have said 6 30-second commercials. So now, you know, with a PVR and you've got the counter, the time on the bottom, it's easy to time this stuff. So I changed the channel. I didn't know, are they on the first commercial, on the last commercial? I didn't know how long I was going to have to wait. So I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And I'm freaking out because now I've seen the same commercials twice through this one commercial break. I've seen every single commercial now twice.
Oh, so they made some kind of mistake.
So with no exaggeration, I waited a full 10 minutes of commercials. And I'm thinking, did someone like push a button twice by accident? I don't know what happened. Anyway, it was the most frustrating thing because 10 minutes of commercials, that's insane. That's hard to sit through. This is why I don't watch regular shows anymore. If I do, I record them and I fast forward.
But when you came back, the show was like on time? Like you didn't miss anything?
No, they were on time and they finished on time. I mean, I had missed Letterman. They were already on the next guest, so I didn't get to see what I wanted.
On my PVR, when I go to a show, I have the option to start from the beginning.
Yeah, I had that option too, and I was going to do that, but first I wanted to see because maybe I didn't know if I'd missed Letterman or not.
Yeah.
So eventually I did that. And I saw the interview. But the fact is, I had to sit through 10 minutes of commercials, and I'm like, this is not normal. And maybe it's like that every night on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. I don't know.
We'd have to run an experiment. We'll have to watch Jimmy Kimmel and see what's going on.
I just think that 10 minutes of commercials is not normal. Anyway.
First world problems. But also, was Letterman even good? Like, was it worth it?
Yeah, he's always good. He was funny.
Because guarantee you can go to Jimmy Kimmel's YouTube page the next day and see the whole thing.
Right, of course. I mean, I just wanted to watch it live because I happened to be awake and had nothing to do, but whatever.
I read an article about all these late night shows, and it's like back in the day, you found out that a guest was on, and you stayed up late, and maybe you recorded it, and it was like a big deal. Did you hear Madonna's going to be on David Letterman tonight? Or did you hear Britney Spears is going to be on Jay Leno? Or like, it was like when someone big was on, it took over. Like there was a buzz about it. Now it's like no one cares because first of all, everyone records it, right? And also people don't even record it because like literally all the good stuff is just available on YouTube the next day. Like you can see everything, so it's kind of weird.
Although in Canada, it's harder to find those YouTube clips because a lot of times you'll go to the website.
Yes.
Like if you go to the NBC website, it won't work in Canada. Same thing with Saturday Night Live. If you go to the NBC website the day after, it doesn't work in Canada.
Mm-hmm. These are Canadian problems that like American people don't even know, can't even conceive that we have to deal with.
Right. So do you have any listener mail? Because actually, after our last episode, after we recorded, I thought of so many other good song intros that I forgot to include.
We're the only show presently in production that cares enough about you, the North American home viewer, to answer our viewer mail on the air.
There's lots of good ones, and yes, we got lots of mail. So we're going to start with the most important. And when I say important, just because it was very, very amazing what our podcast buddy, Jesse Jackson in Texas did this week. He has his own podcast, a Bruce Springsteen themed podcast called Set Lusting Bruce. So normally Jesse will email me literally the day a new episode drops. I get an email from Jesse with like his top 7 of whatever we're doing. And normally when it's about music, I'm like, it's automatic. I get an email right away. Like I know he's listened like the first day. And he didn't send me anything. And then sure enough, a few days later, I'm tagged. Well, we are tagged, but I'm running the Twitter. I'm tagged in Twitter because he's posted not just one, because the next day he posted another. He did his own mini episodes of his top 7 Bruce Springsteen song intros and his top 7 general song intros like we did. He did his own little episodes. So I was really I was really like happy and I forwarded them to you, and it was really actually kind of cool to hear those. So I'm going to post the links to those 2 little episodes in the show description so people can listen to them and hear Jesse's top 7 song intros.
Isn't there an expression that says imitation is the best form of flattery or something?
Yes, it's the sincerest form of flattery, maybe. Yes. So it was really nice because in all his tweets, he really mentioned like, I was inspired by Skip and Josh. So I thought that was really cool. So thanks for that, Jesse. Jason from Montreal. This is a great one, Josh. So, like we released the episode on Tuesday and most times I don't put the episode on our social channels until the next day. Like there's no point in putting it the first day. The people who subscribe, they subscribe. They're going to get it, right? The next day, it's like sometimes even 2 days later, sometimes even a week later. So I'm in the middle of working on Wednesday. I get like a Facebook message from Jason from Montreal, friend of the show. He writes in often. And he's like, he asked me, like, are you feeling better? You sounded really sick on the last episode. He could tell I was congested. I said, yeah. I told him what was going on. And then he's like, but the most important thing, can you drop whatever you're doing and go post the link to the episode on Facebook so that I can comment?
That is hilarious, actually.
So I did what he said. I posted the link. And then within a matter of minutes, we got Jason's top 7 song intros. So he says, great episode as usual. Here are some in no particular order. Station to Station, David Bowie. Obvious Song, Joe Jackson. Burning Down the House, Talking Heads. He calls out a specific live version. Badlands by Bruce Springsteen. Eye in the Sky, Alan Parsons Project. He said, not the radio version. There's a version with an awesome intro, which Mark from Philadelphia commented on and said, actually, it's a separate song called Sirius. And Mark is right, because I had that album as a kid, that Eye in the Sky album. So actually kind of 2 separate songs, but one leads into the other. Once Upon a Time by Simple Minds, and Crazy on You and Over the Hills and Crazy on You, that's Heart, and Over the Hills and Far Away, Led Zeppelin. That's a great one, Over the Hills and Far Away. I think I could have put that one in my list. Derek from Montreal. When I saw the category, my first thought was, number 1, Where the Streets Have No Name, and then fill in the other 6. That's how I felt too. So Derek was in complete agreement with me. He said honorable mention for him to Ozzy Osbourne, Crazy Train, and Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple, and Layla by Derek and the Dommels. Smoke on the Water, I mean, that's really quite famous, that beginning of that song.
That's a great one.
Yeah, that could be on anybody's list. Mark from Philadelphia actually did message us with his picks. He said loved all of our picks. He thought they were great. He calls out Radar Love, Wish You Were Here, another Pink Floyd song he mentions. It's funny because we never talk about Pink Floyd. Owner of a Lonely Heart by Yes, Stairway to Heaven, Layla, Enter Sandman, and Mark, in only Mark's way, with some weird twisted logic, he says that should be the right one because it's Mariano Rivera's theme song. So because it's sports related, it's somehow the link between the old Skip and Josh podcast, sports only, and the new Skip and Josh podcast, music and other things.
I get what he's saying. So I don't disagree with him.
I get it, but it's kind of weird. My wife loved our episode.
Did she actually listen to it?
Yes, she did.
No,
and
really?
She yeah. And actually, she told me that the song that you picked, the My Chemical Romance.
Yeah. There's no way she likes that song.
No, she never heard that song before, but she loved the little clip that I put in. And then I actually played her the whole song because I was only able to put in, like, I don't want to put in more than 30 seconds or 20 seconds of a song.
Right. Otherwise, we're going to get shut down by a certain big company whose name I don't want to mention.
It ends with Audify. But she really liked that song, and she told me, like, she somehow, like, she loved the beginning of it, and I played her the whole song, which has a way better intro because I've only used a small portion because actually it builds up from this barely audible piano.
Which is what I was trying to explain verbally, which is hard to explain if you haven't heard the song. Yeah.
So then, as you know, I went to Chicago this past week, and my uncle called me. And I didn't answer because I was in the plane, right? I didn't have any connection. And then he called me twice. and then I got the voicemails when I landed, and he was like a little worried how come I didn't answer and everything. And then I explained to him I was in Chicago. He just wanted to tell me about our podcast. And he said the number 1 intro of all time, bar none. And he says like it should be number 1 on our list is Elton John, Funeral for a Friend, Love Lies Bleeding. Are you familiar with this song?
Of course, yes.
Anyways. Yes. It's a really long song. It's actually 2 songs combined, hence the title. I listened to it over and over this week. The intro is like 5 minutes long, and actually it is 100% worthy of being on our list, and it's a great pick. So thanks, Uncle Lenny.
So anyway, maybe we'll do part 2 of that topic another week.
Oh, there's so many. There
are so many.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about a topic that Derek here in Montreal messaged me about months and months ago, and he called it players in the wrong uniforms. And we can take this in a number of ways. So my interpretation and how I created my list is like players that kind of played for a long time on one team and then went to another team and it's kind of wrong. Like it's just wrong, you know?
Yeah, and actually I'll elaborate on that because First of all the players on my list are retired and retired a long time ago, actually, because these days players switch teams so often and so regularly that it actually, this phenomenon, if you want to call it that, doesn't happen anymore. It happened back in the day when a player would stay with the same team for 10 years or even more than that. And then at the end of his career, he'd go to another team just because he wanted to hang on for a few more years. And then it just looked wrong. But that doesn't even happen anymore because no one stays on the same team anymore anyway.
Yeah. So actually trying to research this, you really have to put the right keywords into a Google search to find other lists like this, right? If like I had like my top 2, those were solid, and I wanted to try to remember others. So there's kind of like 2 different versions of this. So there's players that I didn't even remember played on teams that I saw them listed. I was like, this is not true. Like I had no recollection of certain players being on certain teams. So automatically that kind of qualifies them for my list, because if I can't even remember it, then it's completely wrong. In most of those cases, those players were like finishing out their career. You know, they're Hall of Famers. They had great careers. They went for a cup of coffee at the end of their career, and they kind of sucked, and they really should have just retired with their original team that we know them for. Like, that would have been the right thing to do instead of hanging on for 1 year. There's a couple on my list where the players, they changed teams, and they were still incredibly productive on their new team, even though, like, in my mind, they're still on the wrong team. You know what I mean? Like, they still should have stayed on their original team, even though switching for them probably was the right thing for their career, because you'll see I have a couple on my list. Like, there's guys that switch teams, and you're like, what? But they were still good for a couple of years, you know? So that's like the 2 kind of versions I have on my list.
So I really like this topic for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't have to do any research at all, which is great, because if I didn't remember that this happened, then clearly it didn't stick in my brain and they don't belong on my list.
So you had all your 7, you just got off the top of your head?
Yeah, in fact, that's the other reason I like this topic, because we could do part 2 and maybe even part 3 of this topic, because I have so many on my list and all of them were just off the top of my head.
Well, what the listeners don't know is that you messaged me last night saying you want to do just baseball.
We could have done it by sport. Like, we could have just done baseball this week and then just hockey next week. Football and basketball would have been harder to do, like an entire episode. But
for you, basketball's harder because you're not as familiar. But when I was looking up lists, there's so much good basketball examples. Like, honestly, there's some great ones. But we're gonna mix up all the sports, and we'll see where we're at. I don't know if we're gonna have any the same.
2, I think we're gonna have 2, maybe 3 the same.
There's one guaranteed.
Right.
That I'm 100% sure. And we'll see about the rest. So who's gonna start?
I'll go first. I think you went first last time.
Number 7.
So the only football player on my list, and again, there are some others on my honorable mentions, but we can talk. Actually, I don't even want to mention my honorable mentions, because then we can't do a second part of this episode. Number 7 on my list, football player, Joe Montana in a Kansas City Chiefs uniform. To me, that just looks wrong, because when I think of Joe Montana, arguably one of the best quarterbacks of all time, if not the best, when I think of him, I think of the San Francisco 49ers. To me, the 2 are synonymous. And then to think that he played, was it 1 or 2 or 3 years on Kansas City? It's just wrong. So this is the perfect player for this category.
You start off with a bang. Let me just tell you, he's on my list. It's further up, so we're going to get to it. He played 2 seasons on Kansas City. I mean, when you think of Joe Montana, it's the 49ers, the red and gold, or the white and gold, like that gold helmet. I mean, that's Joe Montana. Like, it's weird that he was ever on another team. So I'm going to continue in the same vein with my number 7. I'm going to go with a different San Francisco 49er. And that's Jerry Rice. So Jerry Rice played 20 seasons in the NFL. And 16 of them were on the 49ers. He, at the age of 39, he didn't feel like he was ready to retire. So he just crossed the bridge and went to the Oakland Raiders, and he played 4 seasons on the Raiders. He actually had 2,000-yard seasons at the age of 39 and 40 on the Raiders. Like, it's actually incredible. So this is where I was saying, like, he was so productive even when he changed teams. But that's not even it. There's something that happened when I was looking up Jerry Rice. In his final season, he played Oakland. Oakland let him go. He played 9 games for Seattle, which I have zero recollection of. So it's like part 1, he shouldn't have ever been a Raider. That's no good. Although the Raider uniform is really nice, so it's hard to say like it's wrong because he looked good in the uniform and he was productive. But Jerry Rice as a Seattle Seahawk, that's wrong in every which way.
By the way, I don't know. He's 50-something years old now. If you see him on television,
like he could still play.
He looks like he can still play. Like, he will look good in any uniform, even today.
Absolutely. You know, most career receptions, most career receiving yards, most career receiving touchdowns, most total touchdowns. Like, sometimes people are like, who's the best receiver of all time? And then, like, new people, like my son, because he plays Madden, and Jerry Rice is never that good in Madden. Randy Moss is always better because he's taller, you know? Like, that's nonsense. The stats speak for themselves.
Number 6.
Okay, so before I tell you who my next player is, I could have done all 7 of my players could have been Toronto Blue Jays, because I don't know.
There's a lot.
If you recall, the Toronto Blue Jays, when they were winning those World Series in the early 90s, they acquired all these players from all these other teams. So I could have had all 7 of my players from the Blue Jays, but I only have 1. And I don't even know if you will remember that this player was on the Blue Jays, because I don't think it even lasted a full season. But this guy in this uniform looked completely wrong, and that is Frank Thomas.
Oh, he's on my list.
Because he's synonymous with the Chicago White Sox, with the black and white
100%.
pinstripe uniform. And then to see him in a Blue Jays uniform, it looked so weird to me.
He was on Oakland also before he was on the Jays.
Yeah, I don't even remember that.
Yeah. Oh, no. I mean, you're right. That's a great pick, and it's in my list. So number 6 for me is another, we're going to stay in baseball, Pedro Martinez. Now, you can pick and choose which uniform you think is wrong with Pedro Martinez. You know, he started with the Dodgers 1 or 2 seasons, then came to the Expos, where he got better and better and better to the point where he was the best pitcher in the National League. We traded him to the Red Sox for a bag of baseballs, and then obviously Hall of Fame career, like all his run on the Red Sox is maybe the best 5, 6, 7 years in history. And then he went to the Mets, which I do remember. But the one that's wrong, the one that's really wrong, is that in his final season, he was on the Phillies. And that, like, you can barely remember that he was even on the Phillies. He only pitched 44 innings for the Phillies.
I don't even remember that at all. I don't. Well, again, also after 1994, I stopped following baseball for about 10 years. So anything that happened between like 95 and 2005, don't even ask me about it.
It's a blur to you.
Number 5.
So I'm going to stick with baseball. And when I actually looked up this player, I didn't even remember that he played on some of these teams. So did you know that Tim Raines played on Florida or on Baltimore or on Oakland? Like, I knew he played on the Expos and the Yankees and the White Sox, but I didn't know that he played on the Marlins and the Orioles and the A's. So to even see him in those uniforms would just boggle my mind.
I don't even remember him being on Marlin or on the A's. I kind of know that he was on Baltimore because Tim Raines Jr. was drafted by the Orioles and started there. But that's a great pick. That's a great pick. So my number 5 is Frank Thomas. You already mentioned him. Frank Thomas as a J. You know, in that 1 year he was on the Jays for maybe more than a year, but like in 2007 he had 26 home runs for the Jays. He had a good season.
Yeah, home run hitters can always hit home runs, right?
Yeah, and especially when you're the size of Frank Thomas. The guy was a mountain, right? Now like you see some players that are like even Aaron Judge, who's like 6'7" or whatever he is. Like he's still not as imposing a hitter as Frank Thomas. Like Frank Thomas was the most scary hitter you could ever want to face. Like the guy was a giant,
and
it
looked like he was gonna bust out of his uniform because he liked to wear those tight uniforms, and so that's another reason why he looked weird in the Blue Jays uniform.
But also, like, the thing that I always loved about Frank Thomas, he's one of my favorite players. A guy like that, who's as big as he is, could just come up there and say, I'm just going to smash homers. The guy was the most patient hitter ever. He would get, the guy had 100 walks every year. His on-base percentage was always well over 400. He didn't hit for a low batting average. Like, the guy was just like a complete hitter. And then pitchers were always afraid to pitch him, like, on the inside half because he's too scary to hit home runs, that he's going to pull the ball. He didn't care. Half of Frank Thomas's career home runs were to the opposite field because he was so good at just hitting them on the outside corner, and he was so big and strong that he'd hit fly balls to the outfield and then he'd just keep going till they went over the fence. So that's Frank Thomas.
Number 4.
So we get to hockey finally. You knew you were going to see some hockey players on this list. So did you know that Larry Robinson played on the Los Angeles Kings?
I did know that. Yes.
I knew you knew that, but I still cannot picture him in a Los Angeles Kings uniform.
I think he was still actually pretty good for the Kings after he went there for a couple years, no? Like, he wasn't completely washed up, no?
I don't know. I don't remember what his stats were. I mean, this was obviously the last 2 years of his career. So,
right.
And if the Canadians felt that, they didn't need to re-sign him, how good could he have been? But whatever. It's just weird to see Larry Robinson in an LA Kings uniform.
Right. That's a good pick. That's a very good pick. So I got my number 4. This player, you could say he's in the wrong uniform twice. He pitched 23 seasons in the major leagues, and that's Greg Maddux. It's interesting because you remember that Greg Maddux started on the Cubs. He actually won the Cy Young as a Cub before he went to the Braves. But he went back to the Cubs after. So he actually ended up playing 10 seasons of his career on the Cubs and 11 on Atlanta, which seems wrong because in your mind, he's a Brave, right? But did you know that he pitched 2 seasons on San Diego and then 2 seasons for the Dodgers after he left the Braves? Like, I have zero recollection of that at all. Like, I don't even remember it.
Yeah, I think this happened in that 10-year span where I wasn't watching baseball. So no, I don't remember that at all.
It's pretty crazy. So for me, Maddux is a Brave. I mean, if you're a diehard Cubs fan, you could say, yes, he's a Cub, but he's definitely not a Padre or a Dodger.
Number 3.
Okay, so the next player on my list, I hope this guy is somewhere on your list, although we're running out of numbers. It's a player by the name of Michael Jordan, and to see him in a Washington Wizards uniform looks very, very strange. Like, it just looked completely wrong.
I didn't have him on my list. I have to admit, it's a bit of an omission. But he was kind of productive as a Wizard.
It has nothing to do with being productive or not productive. It just looks weird.
It does.
Like, I mean, the Wizards uniform looks weird to begin with. Anybody wearing that looks weird. But to see Michael Jordan, this is another guy where you think of Michael Jordan, you automatically think of the Chicago Bulls, like the red 100%. And the white and the black. That's it.
100%.
He shouldn't be in any other uniform.
Was he on the Wizards, or at that time was it Les Boulets?
I think they were the Wizards. I think.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but I think it was the Wizards.
So I did omit Michael Jordan. That's my bad. But my number 3 is also in basketball, and that's Hakeem Olajuwon. He played 17 seasons with Houston. Obviously, he's the all-time franchise player. When you think of the Houston Rockets, it's Hakeem Olajuwon. He brought them 2 championships. He was an all-star 12 times out of his 17 seasons on Houston, but somehow he decided to hang on for one more year as a Raptor. Where he had 7 points per game. I don't even remember that. I'm sure there's these diehard Raptor fans that have followed the team since day one that will tell you, yeah, of course, we had Hakeem for 1 year. I have zero. I don't remember that at all. Like zero. And like, I'm sure if you ask Hakeem, like maybe he had a great time for his 1 year in Toronto, but really, I think it would have just been better for him to finish his career as a Rocket. Like why even bother trying to go somewhere else? Kind of strange.
Number 2.
So I only have 2 players left, and I really hope that you have both of these players on your list.
Mm-hmm.
Although you did mention that one of your players is Joe Montana, so really, you could only have one of these 2 on your list.
Yeah.
So next for me is Guy Lafleur in a Quebec Nordiques or a New York Rangers uniform. Now that is completely wrong.
I should have had that on my list and I didn't, because Lafleur really loved it. I mean, God, you can talk about it.
I see sometimes photos of him in a Nordiques uniform or a Rangers uniform, and sometimes you'll see, especially when he passed away, they showed some highlights of his career.
Yeah.
To see him in those uniforms just looks so weird. Like, again, Guy Lafleur is synonymous with the red, white, and blue of the Montreal Canadiens. That's it.
When he left, and he went to the Rangers first, right?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. That was just him giving the big middle finger to the Canadiens organization. They were like, we think you're washed up. And he's like, no, I'm not. And I'm going to show you. And he was productive for the Rangers. He had like some flashes. Obviously, when you're as good as he is, you're going to have, the skill doesn't go away. And then when he went to the Nordiques, it was like a double middle finger.
I mean, he didn't really take care of himself like players do these days. I heard stories he was smoking cigarettes during intermission in the locker room. So
I
he
heard all
could have
those
probably
stories.
had a longer career if he had actually taken care of his body.
One of my childhood memories is like going into like a dépanneur or grocery store or whatever and seeing like the Journal de Montréal, and there's like a picture of like Guy Lafleur in like a car accident because he was like drinking and driving or whatever. Like, yeah, no, he led a hard life, like, well, he didn't make it. Put it this way, athletes today take care of their bodies. They have nutrition. They work out, whatever. Guy Lafleur was just like, let me put on the skates and let me just skate around, and whatever happens off the ice happens off the ice. So my number 2, I don't know. Maybe it's going to be your number 1. It's Wayne Gretzky. Wayne Gretzky, as a St. Louis Blue, is wrong in every way and shape possible. Gretzky's interesting because we talked about certain players that are synonymous with one team, but you could say that Gretzky is synonymous with the Oilers and the Kings. Like, equally, I don't want to say equally as productive because obviously his greatest years were the Oilers, but he was certainly still amazing and fantastic as a King and took the Kings to the final and elevated hockey in the United States to another level. And then in 95-96, they traded him to the Blues. He played 18 games for the Blues and then 13 playoff games. Everyone thought, oh my God, Gretzky and Brett Hull together, they're going to win the cup. And then, of course, they didn't. And then he left the year after the season and he went to the Rangers. And he actually looked great in the Ranger uniform. The one with the Statue of Liberty, you know that one? But Gretzky as a Blue is just wrong.
Number 1.
Yeah, so Wayne Gretzky is my number 1. And as soon as
you
mentioned this topic, I knew exactly who my number 1 was going to be. And he played on, like you said, 4 different teams, but he did look good in a Kings uniform and he did look good in a Rangers uniform. But I'm specifically saying him in a St. Louis Blues uniform for a number of reasons. First of all, he was only there for, like you said, a month or 2, if you include the playoffs. Also, those were the years where the Blues had this awful uniform. I can't really describe it on an audio podcast, but if you Google it, you'll understand what I mean. Their uniform was just brutal back then. So, and then also, there was a trade that happened in the middle of the season, and you don't expect a player of this stature to get traded at the deadline. Usually when great players go to different teams, it happens in the off season, and you could sort of digest it a little bit better. The other reason he looked good in a Kings uniform is because the Kings, that was the year they changed their uniform from the gold to the black and silver. I think if we ever saw Gretzky in that gold and purple uniform, I don't think I would have been able to stomach that, to be honest.
You're right.
But in the black and silver, I was definitely able to see that. And then, he played many years, several years on the Kings, and he played a few years on the Rangers. But with the Blues, he was only there for, 2, maybe 3 months, depending on how long they lasted in the playoffs. And again, that uniform was just awful. And those were the years where the Blues were just acquiring all these old, aging players to try to win a Stanley Cup. I think Grant Fuhr was on that team too. So yeah, Wayne Gretzky in a St. Louis Blues uniform, just completely wrong on so many levels.
I love it. So we are on the same page. That's my number 2, and then your number 1, and then so my number 1 you mentioned, and it's my favorite football player of all time. That's Joe Montana, because that affected me the most personally when he left the 49ers and went to the Chiefs. I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken, and then to see him in a Kansas City Chief uniform, that was I was like, my brain couldn't compute that, you know? And I know that the 49ers had Steve Young, and then they were making way, and it was the right move and everything, you know, and they did win a Super Bowl with Steve Young shortly after. But Joe Montana as a Chief was really not good. You know, and you know, his first season as a Chief, he had a great season. He was like I was telling you, LaFleur was giving the middle finger to his old organization. Joe Montana was giving a big middle finger to the 49ers because he had a great season his first year on the Chiefs, and they won the wild card game, and they won the second playoff game, and they went to the AFC Championship game. They lost to the Bills. That's when the Bills were in their run of 4 Super Bowls, you know, all in a row. Bills were a juggernaut. I mean. So yeah, Joe Montana is my number 1. Joe Montana as a Chief, no good.
One thing I should have mentioned about Wayne Gretzky. So to this day, him getting traded from the Oilers is the most shocking thing that I've ever experienced in my entire life. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. After that trade happened, nothing else that's happened, never mind in sports, but nothing else that has happened in my life was as shocking as that, because that is something that I thought would never happen in my lifetime. And I can't think of anything that's happened in my lifetime that is more stunning than that.
How many times have we said when something happened in the world of sports, or maybe even in normal life, like in the real world, like non-sport stuff, where something completely out of the blue happens, and we always say, if Gretzky could get traded, anything could happen. Nothing is shocking anymore.
Right? Nothing. The only thing that comes close to that, but it doesn't surpass it, is when Donald Trump won the election.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. But looking back at it now, there were signs that like shouldn't have surprised us. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. So I know you don't want to go over your honorable mentions. I just wanted to ask you, did you consider Tom Brady as a Buck?
I didn't even consider him, no. Because again, I didn't pick any active players because active players change teams so often these days that nothing will surprise me anymore.
He's literally the only active player that you could put here, I think. Just because he's so old, right? Like,
the Skip and Josh podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. If you listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. To interact with the show, send an email to skipandjoshshow@gmail.com. Follow the show on Twitter and go to Facebook to like the show page. And now for some final thoughts from the guys.
So I wasn't aware of this, but I heard a new song by Gord Downey a couple of weeks ago. And when I heard it on the radio the first time, I wasn't even sure what it was because I recognized his voice. And I'm like, well, how is there a new song by Gord Downey or the Tragically Hip? Obviously, that's impossible. And so I actually... You know how every radio station now, they have this thing on their website where you can go and check what song was just played. So I did that right away. And for this particular radio station, the website was not working properly and it had not listed the songs for the past hour. So I couldn't figure it out. So I had to, I tweeted the DJ that was working at that time. And I said, did you play a new song by the Tragically Hip? And she actually responded to me and said, it's actually the new song by Gord Downey and Bob Rock that obviously was recorded before he passed away, but was just released, you know, like, I don't know, 2-3 weeks ago. So apparently there's going to be a full album coming out in the next few months. But they just released one song, and the song's called Luster Parfait. It's actually quite a great song. I bought it already, and I've been listening to it nonstop every day. It's just an amazing song.
Wow, I can't wait to listen to it. I would have never even known. That's amazing. That's a real good public service announcement for those who care about the hip, but more like a private service announcement, I should say, just for me, because I'm going to go listen to it right away.
Do you ever think of things that you used to do all the time and now you don't do them anymore at all?
I mean, I don't think of them, but I mean, I'm sure there are many.
So 20-something years ago, I purchased from the bank a box of checks because 20-something years ago, I had to write checks, you know, every month for rent or...
Are you telling me you had the same checks for 20 years?
So this box of checks that I purchased 20-something years ago actually lasted me until about 2 or 3 months ago because
That's nuts.
in the past few years, like I would write 1, maybe 2 checks a year. Like when do I ever write checks? So
Yeah.
I ran out of checks finally. And I haven't purchased new ones because I'm starting to think, do I even need checks anymore? Like, why would I need a check? Do you still write checks? It's such a weird thing to me. Like you write on this piece of paper and you give it to somebody and somehow they get your money. It seems so archaic to me. Like I know how it works, but there's so many ways that the whole process can just crash and fail. And yet somehow it works.
There's a great Seinfeld skit about the checks. He's like, I have this piece of paper. It says I have the money. Will you take it? You know?
But like it seems so like now these days you have to have a passcode if you're using your credit card or using your phone to pay. Money gets transferred. You can do a money transfer from your phone to your friend within seconds. This whole check business, you have to write it, you have to sign it, you have to put it in an envelope, you have to mail it. Who knows how long it takes to get there. So like, do you still use checks for anything?
I think I write 2 or 3 checks a year. We just ordered new checks like last year and we have a whole bunch. When my kids were little, but that's already like, we're going back like 15 years, right? I know we used to write checks to like the daycare, the school, after school activities. It was always easier than putting cash in an envelope to give to your kid, to bring to school. There's like 1 or 2 checks a year, maybe I think that I write, and I couldn't even tell you what they are right now. But I do know that every now and then it's like, do we have a check? And I have to go find them. Yeah, that's an interesting one, Josh. We could do a whole thing about things that don't exist anymore.
Actually, I was thinking that we could do a whole episode on things we used to do or things that used to happen all the time that we don't do anymore or don't happen anymore.
Right. So I just want to close the show with, I want to just mention the World Series because it's over. And I know we spent a lot of time watching it and texting each other during the games and stuff. So the Astros won, no shock. I'd love to congratulate them, but they're a bunch of scumbags, so I don't even want to do that. They were the better team. They were the better team. Philadelphia was outmatched. Philadelphia had a great run. I'm happy for them. It was fun watching the Phillies get that far, but the Astros were the better team. There's no question about it. But, the Astros had this thing about like this whole cheater cloud over them, right? From 5 years ago and none of those, only 2 of those guys are on the team now. Or no, there might be some, but it's Bregman, Altuve, a couple of pitchers, a few guys here and there. They were on the last time, that team that was accused. Well, I don't want to just say accused. It was kind of proven that they were cheating. But then the last game, what's his name? Who's the player? He gets hit by a pitch on purpose.
Oh, Aledmus Diaz?
I don't know. But like
he was the player who, not in the last game, but in I think game 3 or 4, he stuck his elbow out and got hit by a pitch. Yeah. And luckily the umpire was smart and said, no. You did that intentionally. You're not taking your base. You're staying in the batter's box to finish this at bat. And by the way, if I was the pitcher, I would have complained because he actually stuck his elbow out in the strike zone. So if he didn't, that pitch could have been called a strike. But the umpire called it a ball. But anyway.
So it happened again in the final game 6 in the inning, the consequential inning where the Astros ended up getting 3 runs, and they actually went to replay. They looked at it and they're like, no, it was hit by pitch. And I was like, how is that possible? I looked at the same replay as you. He just stands there and lets himself get hit. Like, I don't get it. Like, I just still don't get it. Like, the ball was literally like, I don't know what the umpires look like. Maybe I don't understand the rule, but like. That guy ended up getting on base, and then the next guy got on, and then they hit a 3-run homer, and then the series was over.
I think it was the catcher Martin Maldonado. I think that's who you're referring to.
Yes, that guy can't hit anyways.
And they showed how in that same at bat, the pitch that he got hit, he was standing as close to the plate as you're allowed to stand without being out of the batter's box. But in the same at bat, 2 pitches earlier, he was further back in the batter's box, like. Closer to third base, not further back, closer to the catcher. So clearly he was crowding the plate intentionally. But according to the letter of the rules, the letter of the law of the rule book, he was in the batter's box and he got hit. So that's why they let him take his base.
I know, but I thought the player had to make some attempt to get out of the way. If you don't even attempt to get out of the way.
you also notice that he literally just got hit by the pitch and then walked to first base. Like he wasn't even in any pain whatsoever because like it hit his padding or something.
I just thought that like for a team like the Astros that has this cheating cloud over them, they still continue to cheat. You know?
Agreed. By the way, that last game I watched the last game, and when the final out happened and like they started celebrating, I think I was reading something at the time on my phone.
Yeah. I just turned it off.
I didn't even look up
like,
from my
I'm
phone.
done.
I just continued reading what I was reading. It was the most anticlimactic moment of my life, I think.
That's super funny. And did you hear that they fired their GM and the assistant GM yesterday?
So what happened was they offered the GM a 1-year extension, and he was pissed because he felt he deserved more than a 1-year extension. So he turned it down. So he sort of quit rather than they fired him. But then then they fired the assistant GM. Yeah, the owner of the Astros is a complete idiot.
Look, they have a good team. They'll probably be in contention next year, and the same thing will happen where literally the whole country is going to be rooting against them, except for all the people that live in Houston. So
the thing is, they have amazing pitching, and even though they cheated when they won, it had nothing to do with pitching. It had everything to do with hitting. And even if they lose Justin Verlander to free agency, they still have amazing pitching. So they will be good next year. You're 100% right.
Yeah. All right, that's all I got for today, Josh. I'll speak to you. It was great talking about players in the wrong uniforms. It's always good to go back and look at some of the weird stuff in sports that happened. I'll talk to you next time.
Have a great week.